Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I'm continuing in part two here about some of the odd labels of the first decade of the 20th century. And I grabbed another pile here, and I hope I can squeeze it in to 10 minutes. I'll do my best. As I mentioned to you in the first video, that Columbia constantly sent obsolete records to many companies that would put their label on it. And there were three companies in Chicago that used obsolete Columbia records, and each one put a different sized hole for their spindle. They're all on the same street in Chicago, and the first is called the Standard Disc record. The second was called the Harmony Disc record. Notice the hole is getting bigger. And then we have number three, the United record. And once again, the hole is even bigger. There are other companies that actually made the spindle hole the size of the label practically, which was insane for lack of a better word, but it sold. Another label that was popular in the latter part, after about 1907, for Sears, was a label called Oxford. And Oxford used obsolete discs from every company. In fact, let's see, this is a Oxford made with a Columbia record. This is an Oxford made from a Zonaphone record. And this is a Oxford made from an Imperial Master. Once again, as I mentioned, Imperial Masters have the numbers that are backwards. I'm wondering if we can, you can probably see that there. It's backwards, so you know. Now, I wanted to show you a series of 7-inch recordings that are kind of neat. I find rather fascinating. Of course, the first is the Zonaphone label. It's a little hard to see. Very simple. This is the early Zonaphone. Looks very much like a Berliner. In many cases, they were. Speaking of Berliner, this is a lovely Berliner record. The early label, William Paris Chambers, who was a very famous cornetist. This was made around 1897, I guess, 1897, 1898. The next is the first label for the Consolidated Talking Machine Company. And that is this, the improved gramophone record manufactured by the Consolidated Gramophone Company of Philadelphia. What's interesting is there's a little message on the back. Which tells you all the information when these first came out. Here we are with another Columbia record. It's a Peerless disc record. And actually, you can see this was made for W.S. Simpson on 7 Warren Street in New York City. Hey, whoever wanted to pay the money, Columbia was ready to send records. This is another Oxford record. It's made from a Imperial Master. And once again, as I tried to illustrate to you, the number is backwards. Now, Columbia, when it got its start, of course, it started with their first records, which were called Climax, which were pressed by the Globe Record Company. And I made a recording actually here earlier that explains the whole history, so I don't need to repeat myself. But this is a wonderful early Climax recording very early, right around September, October of 1901, because you can see there is stamped information, because this was a blank record initially. They actually just stamped the information, and then they started within 2 weeks of producing these records, putting on labels. So this is an extremely early example of a Climax record. Now, of course, as you've probably heard, if you listen to the recording I made about the history of Columbia, and which is available here, you will know that Eldridge Johnson sent some people over to do a raid and get all the masters from the Climax Company at the Globe Record Company, because they actually purchased the Globe Record Company underneath Columbia's back. They didn't even know it. And so they stamped every one of the masters with this marking, and it's really quite fascinating. See it here. Show it to you, because it's right there. It isn't easy to show this here. What that says is VTM, that round circle. Every one of the Columbia records was marked Victor Talking Machine Company, which must have been amazingly embarrassing. But this is one of the last type of Climax records. There was a silver broken ringed Climax that came out at the very end as well, which would also have the VTM. One of the more unusual records as well, and this one's kind of strange because I rescued it. It's an improved record. This is the second label after Consolidated. And you can see that Eldridge Johnson's name is on the label, but it doesn't say Victor anywhere, because it isn't a Victor record. But if you look on the back, there is a little notice there from the Consolidated Talking Machine Company. It's still running. We haven't gotten rid of that yet. So it's kind of an interesting record that's on the point of being very early and just becoming part of just the improved record by Victor. So it still had that sticker, so it's quite unique. Now here's another. This was actually sold by Sears as well. These were Harvard disc records. And they were taken from, usually, Columbia Masters. It's interesting when you look at that first 10-year period of records, because there's so many different labels. There's countless companies coming out, getting sued, collapsing, and disappearing. There's a whole mess of them in that crazy, wild decade, 1901 to 1910, and fascinating stuff. So I just wanted to share some of this stuff. As I said in the first video, you read about a lot of this stuff, but you don't get to see it so often. So I thought it would be nice to share some of it with you and look at some of the historic recordings of the first decade of the 20th century.